Hello, and welcome back to Learn English by Stories. Today, we travel back more than 2,000 years to the land of sand, sun, and the Great River Nile. We are going to tell the story of one of the most legendary women in all of human history. Legendary adjective. So famous and remarkable that stories are told about you for centuries. Asterisk example. Her courage was legendary. People still talk about it today. The story of Cleopatra VII, the last queen of Egypt, is a tale that takes us back more than 2,000 years to the land of sand, sun, and the Great River Nile. She is undoubtedly one of the most legendary women in all of human history, a figure so famous and remarkable that stories have been told about her for centuries. She has been portrayed in paintings, plays, films, and books for over 2 millennia. Many people think they know her story, but most of what people believe about Cleopatra is myth rather than actual history. The real Cleopatra was not simply a beautiful woman who seduced powerful men. She was a scholar, a politician, a brilliant military leader, and an incredibly resilient survivor in one of the most dangerous worlds in history, the ruthless courts of ancient power. To truly understand Cleopatra, we must first understand the ancient world she was born into. Cleopatra was born around 69 BC, living in a time we call antiquity. Egypt at this time was one of the oldest and most magnificent civilizations on Earth. For more than 3,000 years, the mighty pharaohs had ruled Egypt, building the Great Pyramids, awe-inspiring temples, and one of the most profound cultures in human history. However, by the time Cleopatra was born, Egypt was no longer the most powerful nation in the world. A new, aggressive empire was rapidly rising, the Roman Empire. Rome was expanding in every direction, having already conquered Greece, Spain, North Africa, and much of the Middle East. Egypt was essentially surrounded by Roman territories, and inside Egypt itself, the political situation was deeply unstable. Cleopatra's family, the Ptolemaic dynasty, had ruled Egypt for about 275 years by the time of her birth. Surprisingly to many, they were actually Greek by origin, not Egyptian. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BC, he appointed a trusted Greek general named Ptolemy to govern it after his death. Ptolemy became the first king of this new dynasty. For generations, Cleopatra's family had ruled Egypt, yet they had always maintained their Greek identity, keeping Greek customs and speaking only Greek. Cleopatra, however, was fundamentally different from all her ancestors. She made a deliberate, highly strategic political decision. She learned to speak the Egyptian language. According to ancient historians like Plutarch, Cleopatra was a polymath who could speak 9 languages, including Egyptian, Ethiopian, Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, Greek, and Latin. This linguistic ability was a massive achievement and a brilliant political move. By speaking Egyptian, Cleopatra connected herself to her people in a way her family never had. She actively visited their temples, enthusiastically embraced their religion, and presented herself not merely as a foreign Greek ruler over Egypt, but as Egypt's own true pharaoh, the living daughter of the sun god Ra. Because of this, the ordinary Egyptian people adored her. But before Cleopatra could safely reign as the beloved queen of Egypt, she first had to survive the intense dangers posed by her own ruthless family. Cleopatra grew up in the royal palace of Alexandria, which was arguably the most magnificent city in the ancient world at the time. Founded by Alexander the Great on the Mediterranean coast where the Nile meets the sea, Alexandria was a jewel of learning, trade, and beauty. It housed the Great Library, the largest collection of books and knowledge in the ancient world, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But inside the beautifully adorned royal palace, the atmosphere was dark, brutal, and utterly ruthless. The Ptolemaic royal family had a notorious and bloody history of brothers killing brothers, sisters poisoning sisters, and children overthrowing their parents. In this family, power was absolutely everything, and familial bonds meant nothing when the throne of Egypt was at stake. Cleopatra's father was Ptolemy XII, a king who was notorious for being incredibly weak and entirely dependent on Rome for his survival. The Romans mockingly called him Auletes, meaning the flute player, suggesting he was soft, frivolous, and deeply unsuited for leadership. Ptolemy XII spent enormous fortunes bribing Roman officials just to keep Egypt safe from outright Roman conquest. The Egyptian people, heavily taxed to pay these bribes, absolutely hated him for it. Eventually, they revolted, forcing Ptolemy XII to flee to Rome for his life. During his absence, his eldest daughter, Berenice IV, boldly seized the Egyptian throne. When Ptolemy XII finally returned years later, backed by an army of Roman soldiers, he immediately executed his own daughter Berenice to reclaim his power. This brutal environment shaped the young Cleopatra. She watched, she learned, and she understood one fundamental truth. To survive in this treacherous world, she had to be stronger, smarter, and far more calculating than everyone around her. When her father died in 51 BC, Cleopatra was around 18 years old. Following Egyptian custom and her father's royal will, she was elevated to co-ruler of Egypt alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was merely a boy of 10. While they ruled together in theory, Cleopatra practically ruled alone. However, her brother's top advisors, three powerful and ambitious men named Pothinus, Achillas, and Theodotus, deeply resented a strong female ruler. They manipulated the young Ptolemy XIII, pushing him to challenge his sister's authority. Within 3 years, these advisors orchestrated a swift military coup. Cleopatra, outmaneuvered and lacking military support, was forced to flee Egypt. At 21 years old, she found herself in exile, stripped of her kingdom, with no army and no allies. Yet, rather than giving up, Cleopatra immediately began plotting her glorious return. In 48 BC, the dynamics of global power shifted dramatically when Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the Roman world, arrived in Egypt. Caesar had come pursuing his great political enemy, Pompey, with whom he had been fighting a bitter civil war for total control of the Roman Republic. Pompey had fled to Egypt seeking refuge. However, the calculating advisors of the young Ptolemy XIII made a catastrophic misjudgment. Believing they were doing Caesar a favor that would win them his favor, they assassinated Pompey the moment he arrived and presented his severed head to Caesar as a gift. Instead of being grateful, Caesar was deeply disgusted and fiercely offended. He had wanted to pardon Pompey or deal with him politically, not see a fellow Roman executed by foreigners. Now residing in the royal palace of Alexandria, Caesar held immense leverage. Both Ptolemy XIII and the exiled Cleopatra desperately needed his military backing to secure the throne. Ptolemy XIII had the distinct advantage of already being inside the city. Cleopatra was stuck in the desert in exile, but Cleopatra possessed incredible audacity and sharp intelligence. In a move of brilliant strategic daring, she had herself secretly smuggled into the heavily guarded royal palace. Hidden inside a rolled-up carpet, or perhaps a linen sack, carried by her loyal servant Apollodorus, she bypassed her brother's guards. The carpet was carried directly into Caesar's private quarters and unrolled. And there, suddenly, stood the 21-year-old exiled queen of Egypt. This singular moment changed the course of world history. Julius Caesar, a highly experienced 52-year-old general and statesman, was utterly captivated by the sheer bravery and political genius of this young woman who had risked her life just to speak with him. Contrary to the popular, misleading myth that Cleopatra simply seduced powerful men with physical beauty, ancient sources make it clear that her true magnetism lay elsewhere. She was highly articulate, intensely charismatic, and intellectually brilliant. What she offered Caesar was not mere romance, but a highly valuable political and economic partnership. She was the rightful queen of the wealthiest nation on earth. To Caesar, who desperately needed Egypt's vast grain supplies and gold to fund his Roman campaigns, her proposition was irresistible. Caesar officially took Cleopatra's side in the dynastic dispute. Backed by Roman legions, Cleopatra defeated her brother Ptolemy XIII, who drowned in the Nile River during the ensuing Alexandrian War. With her enemies eliminated, Cleopatra was fully restored to the throne. Caesar remained in Egypt for several months, embarking on a magnificent, leisurely voyage up the Nile River with Cleopatra on a massive royal barge. During this time, Cleopatra became pregnant, eventually giving birth to a son in 47 BC, whom she named Ptolemy Caesar, affectionately known by the Egyptians as Caesarion, or Little Caesar. Caesar eventually returned to Rome to manage the complex politics of the Republic, leaving Cleopatra securely on the Egyptian throne. For the next 2 years, she ruled Egypt independently with exceptional skill. She expertly managed the crucial Nile floods, optimized the agricultural harvests, stabilized the national treasury, and navigated complex diplomatic relations. By any objective historical measure, she was an incredibly competent and successful ruler. However, everything changed on March 15, 44 BC, when Julius Caesar was brutally assassinated, stabbed 23 times by a conspiracy of senators in the Roman Senate. For Cleopatra, the news was devastating. Her greatest political ally and the father of her child was dead, and Rome was instantly plunged back into a chaotic civil war. Cleopatra retreated to Egypt, waiting and watching as Rome tore itself apart. Following Caesar's assassination, the vast Roman world was eventually divided between two massively powerful figures. In the West, ruling Rome and Europe, was Octavian, Caesar's legally adopted son and chosen heir, a man known for being cold, calculating, and ruthless. In the East, controlling Greece and the Middle East, was Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted general, a bold, highly charismatic, and passionately emotional leader. In 41 BC, Mark Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in the city of Tarsus in modern-day Turkey. Antony urgently needed Egypt's immense wealth and agricultural resources to fund his upcoming military campaigns. He summoned her as a subordinate, expecting the Queen of Egypt to bow to Roman authority. Cleopatra, completely understanding the power dynamics at play, absolutely refused to play the role of a subservient vassal. Instead, she staged one of the most spectacular, awe-inspiring entrances in recorded history. She sailed up the river Cydnus into Tarsus on a massive, magnificent golden barge. The ship featured rich purple sails perfumed with expensive exotic floral scents, and its silver oars rode in perfect time to the live music of flutes and harps. Cleopatra herself reclined beneath a stunning golden canopy, dressed elaborately as Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, surrounded by beautiful servants dressed as mythological cupids and sea nymphs. It was an absolute masterpiece of political theater. Without speaking a single word, she communicated to Mark Antony that she was not his subordinate, but his absolute equal, and perhaps even his superior in wealth and grandeur. Mark Antony was completely overwhelmed and instantly captivated. This spectacular meeting in Tarsus sparked one of history's most famous political alliances and passionate love stories. Antony and Cleopatra became partners in every conceivable sense, politically, militarily, and romantically. Antony spent the winter of 41 to 40 BC with her in Alexandria, leading to the birth of twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Over the years, they built an extraordinary life together. They formed a private society called the Society of Inimitable Livers, enjoying lavish feasts, deep philosophical debates, and grand theatrical entertainment. But their partnership was rooted in profound strategic ambition. Antony needed Egyptian wealth to maintain his armies, while Cleopatra needed Roman military might to protect her empire. Together, they envisioned building a massive new Eastern empire that could genuinely rival Rome itself. In 34 BC, they held a highly provocative public ceremony known as the Donations of Alexandria. In front of a massive crowd, Antony declared Cleopatra the Queen of Kings and proclaimed Caesarion the only true and rightful heir of Julius Caesar, a direct political insult to Octavian. Antony also distributed vast Eastern Roman territories to Cleopatra and their children. Back in Rome, Octavian watched these developments with furious calculation. Recognizing the immense threat, he launched a vicious, highly effective propaganda campaign against the couple. Octavian portrayed Antony as a weak man corrupted by a dangerous, foreign enchantress. He convinced the Roman public that Antony had abandoned traditional Roman discipline and loyalty for the decadent, immoral pleasures of an Eastern queen. This propaganda masterfully turned the proud Roman citizenry against Antony. In 32 BC, Octavian formally declared war. Cleverly, he declared war exclusively on Cleopatra, framing the conflict not as a Roman civil war against Antony, but as a righteous defense of Rome against a foreign enemy. The climax of this monumental struggle occurred on September 2, 31 BC, at the Battle of Actium, a massive naval clash off the western coast of Greece. Octavian's incredibly disciplined fleet, commanded by his brilliant tactical general Agrippa, faced the combined, heavily funded naval forces of Antony and Cleopatra. Remarkably, Cleopatra was personally present at the battle, commanding her own squadron of Egyptian warships from her flagship. The battle quickly turned chaotic and went disastrously wrong for the Egyptian Antonian forces. Agrippa used superior tactics to trap and destroy large sections of their fleet. In a decision that has deeply puzzled historians for millennia, Cleopatra suddenly ordered her surviving ships to break through the enemy lines and retreat southward back toward Egypt. Seeing her depart, Antony abandoned his men and followed her. Whether she panicked or made a cold, calculated decision to save her treasury and fleet to fight another day, the result was the same. The battle was lost, their forces surrendered to Octavian, and their grand dream of an Eastern empire was permanently shattered. Retreating to Egypt, Antony and Cleopatra prepared for the inevitable. By the summer of 30 BC, Octavian's advancing armies arrived in Alexandria. Seeing that the situation was entirely hopeless, Antony's remaining troops deserted him, switching their allegiance to the victorious Octavian. Believing false reports that Cleopatra had already taken her own life, a devastated Marc Antony fell on his sword, committing suicide in the traditional Roman military manner to avoid capture. He was brought, dying, to Cleopatra, who had barricaded herself inside her massive, fortified royal mausoleum. He passed away in her arms, leaving the 39-year-old queen completely alone, her armies decimated, her lover dead, and her enemies literally at her doorstep. Octavian finally entered Alexandria and demanded an audience with Cleopatra. His intentions were perfectly clear. He intended to capture her alive, transport her back to Rome, and parade her in heavy iron chains through the Roman streets as the ultimate trophy of his grand military triumph. Cleopatra, a woman who had reigned as Queen of Kings, who had partnered with Julius Caesar and Marc Antony, absolutely refused to be utterly humiliated and reduced to a Roman slave. On August 12, 30 BC, Cleopatra took her own life inside her mausoleum. While the most famous and enduring legend claims she allowed a venomous Egyptian sp. a sacred cobra hidden within a basket of figs. To bite her, historians debate the exact method, suggesting she may have consumed a powerful, fast-acting poison. Regardless of the specific mechanism, her death was a highly deliberate, carefully planned act. Cleopatra VII, the final ruling pharaoh of Egypt, chose to die entirely on her own terms, denying Octavian his ultimate prize. Shortly after her death, Octavian ruthlessly executed her son Caesarion to eliminate any rival claimants to Caesar's legacy. Egypt was officially annexed, downgraded to a mere province of the newly formed Roman Empire, bringing the glorious 3,000-year history of the pharaohs to a definitive end. Today, looking past the unfair portrayals that reduce her to a mere symbol of romance and seduction, we see the real Cleopatra. She was an extraordinary polymath, a deeply skilled economic administrator who brought prosperity to her nation, a bold geopolitical strategist, and a remarkably resilient survivor who fiercely outlasted many of her enemies. She left behind a legacy that championed knowledge, cultural preservation, and female competence. Her final, defiant act of choosing death over subjugation remains a powerful historical testament to absolute human dignity. Cleopatra's true power lay not just in her legendary charm, but in her brilliant intellect, her masterful communication, and her unbreakable courage, making her an immortal figure whose incredible story continues to fascinate and inspire the world over 2,000 years later. Inspire, verb. To fill someone with the desire and ability to do something. To motivate. Thank you so much for learning English with me today. Today you practiced listening to narrative English, storytelling English, and learned vocabulary from history, politics, and culture. Leave your comment below. What did you think of Cleopatra? Was she a hero? A survivor? A romantic? A politician? Write your answer in English, and I will read every comment. In our next video, we will tell the story of Alexander the Great, the Macedonian king who conquered the world before the age of 33. Until then, keep learning, keep growing. Goodbye.